There are moments in life when a desire enters your mind so deeply, so silently, that it no longer feels like a simple wish. It feels like destiny trying to remember itself through you. And yet, no matter how intensely you think about it, no matter how many times you visualize it, no matter how desperately you beg reality to change, nothing happens. The relationship never arrives. The money never comes. The opportunity disappears. The life you secretly ache for remains trapped behind invisible walls you cannot explain. And slowly, something dangerous begins to happen inside you. You start doubting yourself. Not your intelligence, not your abilities, but your worthiness. You begin to wonder if the universe hears other people more clearly than it hears you. You watch others effortlessly attract love, success, recognition, abundance, while you remain standing outside the gates of your own life like a ghost nobody notices. But what if the problem was never your desire? What if the problem was the hidden architecture of your unconscious mind? Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is where everything changes, because most people try to manifest from the surface of the mind, from forced positivity, from rehearsed affirmations, from fake confidence. But the unconscious does not respond to performance. It responds to identity, to emotion, to symbols, to belief buried beneath language itself. And if your unconscious mind secretly believes you are unworthy, abandoned, powerless, invisible, then every desire you consciously chase will quietly collapse beneath the weight of that hidden identity. This is why manifestation feels magical for some people and impossible for others. Because manifestation was never about thinking positively. It was about psychological alignment, about inner congruence, about becoming emotionally identical to the reality you seek. Stay with me, because this is important. What Jung discovered about the human psyche was far deeper than modern manifestation culture will ever admit. Your mind is not a machine. It is a living labyrinth, a symbolic universe, a hidden cathedral filled with locked rooms, forgotten wounds, rejected selves, ancient fears, silent desires, and unconscious patterns inherited through generations of human experience. And somewhere inside that invisible structure, your reality is being created, not tomorrow, now. Every interaction, in every emotional reaction, in every belief you repeat unconsciously while pretending not to notice it. Most people never manifest what they want because they are psychologically divided against themselves. One part of them desires love. Another part fears abandonment. One part wants wealth. Another part associates success with guilt, rejection, or danger. One part wants transformation. Another part clings desperately to familiar suffering because suffering has become identity. And here is the part nobody talks about. The unconscious mind always wins. Always. Because the unconscious is older than your conscious personality. It existed before language, before logic, before the mask you wear in front of the world. And if you do not learn how to communicate with it, you will spend your life fighting invisible wars inside yourself while wondering why reality never changes. But Jung discovered something extraordinary. The unconscious communicates through emotion, imagery, repetition, symbolism, and concentrated psychic intensity. Not through endless effort, not through forcing, not through obsession. And once you understand this, manifestation stops being mystical fantasy and becomes psychological transformation. This is why a single moment of genuine inner alignment can alter the direction of an entire life. Not because reality suddenly grants wishes, but because your identity shifts, your nervous system shifts, your emotional frequency shifts, your perception shifts. And once perception changes, reality itself begins reorganizing around the new self emerging within you. Have you ever noticed how certain people enter a room and somehow reality bends around them? Opportunities appear. People trust them. Love gravitates toward them. Doors open. Not because they are lucky, but because they possess internal certainty, an unconscious coherence. A silent belief so deep that reality responds to it almost automatically. And meanwhile, others spend years begging life for permission to receive what they secretly believe they do not deserve. This is where most people remain trapped. Not in external limitation, but in unconscious self-rejection. The tragedy is that many people do not even realize they are rejecting themselves. They smile while feeling empty. They say affirmations while secretly expecting disappointment. They dream about abundance while emotionally identifying with scarcity. And the unconscious notices every contradiction because the unconscious does not listen to your words. It listens to emotional truth. This is why you can repeat a desire 1,000 times and still push it away unconsciously. Because beneath the desire, there is fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of visibility. Fear of becoming someone unfamiliar. And sometimes even fear of finally receiving what you asked for. Because desires are dangerous. They threaten the identity built around suffering. They threaten the comfort of limitation. They threaten the ego's carefully constructed prison. And the ego would rather suffer predictably than transform unpredictably. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He understood that human beings do not resist pain nearly as much as they resist transformation. Because transformation feels like psychological death. The old self begins collapsing. The mask cracks. The false identity trembles. And suddenly you are forced to confront the terrifying question hidden beneath every desire. Who would I become if this actually happened? That question changes everything. Because manifestation is not merely about attracting something external. It is about becoming psychologically capable of holding it internally. Love, power, abundance, recognition, peace. These realities require nervous systems capable of receiving them. And this is why most manifestation techniques fail. They focus on the object of desire while ignoring the identity trying to receive it. But the truth goes further than that. There is a hidden moment, a threshold, where manifestation truly begins. A moment almost nobody notices. It happens in silence, usually late at night. When the world becomes quiet enough for the unconscious mind to speak, you suddenly feel exhausted by pretending, exhausted by forcing, exhausted by chasing. And for one brief moment, you stop performing. You stop begging reality. You stop trying to convince yourself. And beneath all the noise, something ancient awakens, a deeper self, a calmer self, a self untouched by fear. This is the version of you Jung believed existed beneath the persona. The authentic self, not the mask, not the wounded child, not the anxious ego, but the deeper psychological center that already knows who you truly are. And when you touch this state even for 4 minutes, your entire energetic relationship with reality begins changing. Because manifestation is not created through desperation. Desperation repels. Desperation fractures the psyche. Desperation signals emotional absence. True manifestation begins when desire stops feeling like emotional survival and starts feeling like inner certainty, like inevitability, like remembrance. This is why some desires suddenly manifest the moment you emotionally release them. Not because you gave up, but because the psychological resistance dissolved. The unconscious stopped fighting itself, and reality finally had space to move. If this resonates with something deep inside you, if part of you feels strangely emotional hearing this, comment the number 77 below, not for superstition, but as a symbol, a silent acknowledgement that something inside you is beginning to awaken. Because what Jung discovered next was even deeper. He realized the unconscious mind responds most powerfully during moments of concentrated emotional stillness. Not hours of repetition, not endless rituals, but brief moments of complete psychological alignment. And in the next part, you will understand why 4 minutes can become more powerful than years of unconscious effort. Because there is a hidden doorway inside the mind most people never learn to enter, and once you do, reality no longer feels random. There is a hidden reason why most people spend years trying to manifest a new life. while unconsciously recreating the same emotional reality over and over again. It is not because they lack intelligence. It is not because they lack ambition. And it is certainly not because they are incapable of transformation. It is because the unconscious mind is loyal to familiarity more than happiness. This is one of the darkest truths Carl Jung ever uncovered. Human beings do not merely seek pleasure. They seek psychological continuity, even if that continuity destroys them. This is why a person raised around emotional neglect may unconsciously reject healthy love. Why someone who grew up in chaos may feel uncomfortable in peace. Why a person who secretly associates wealth with corruption may sabotage every opportunity that could change their life. The unconscious protects identity at all costs, even painful identity. And this is where manifestation becomes deeply psychological. Because every desire you have must first pass through the hidden filters of the unconscious mind. And if the unconscious perceives the desire as unsafe, unnatural, undeserved, or threatening to your current identity, it quietly blocks it, not to punish you, but to protect the self-image it has spent years constructing. Stay with me because this is important. Most people think they are manifesting consciously, but in reality, they are manifesting emotionally. Your dominant emotional state is not simply a feeling. It is a psychological atmosphere, a silent signal continuously shaping perception, behavior, and reality itself. If you carry abandonment inside you, you will unconsciously notice rejection everywhere. If you carry shame, you will interpret opportunity as danger. If you carry unworthiness, success will feel emotionally unnatural. And what feels unnatural to the unconscious becomes difficult to sustain. This is why people often lose the very things they prayed for. Because receiving something externally is one thing. Feeling internally safe enough to keep it is another. Carl Jung described the psyche as containing hidden fragments of the self buried in darkness. He called this the shadow. And the shadow is not merely evil impulses or hidden anger. It is every rejected aspect of yourself pushed beyond conscious awareness. Your hidden fears, your secret envy, your buried grief, your suppressed desires, your denied power, your wounded child, your unlived life. And here is the terrifying part. What you suppress does not disappear. It waits. It shapes your choices from behind the curtain of consciousness. This is why some people sabotage love the moment it becomes real. Why others procrastinate when success approaches. Why some remain trapped in cycles they consciously hate. Because the shadow always seeks expression. And until you face it consciously, it controls you unconsciously. This is where most manifestation teachings become dangerously shallow. They tell people to focus only on positivity. But Jung understood something far more profound. Healing does not come from escaping darkness. It comes from integrating it. A person who denies fear becomes controlled by fear. A person who denies anger becomes consumed by passive resentment. A person who denies pain becomes emotionally numb. And a person who denies their shadow becomes divided against themselves. Manifestation fails when the psyche is fragmented, because inner contradiction creates energetic conflict. One part of you moves toward desire. Another part pulls away in terror. And this internal war drains psychic energy. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it feels to constantly chase something you deeply want? That exhaustion is often not caused by effort itself. It is caused by unconscious resistance, by the hidden psychological friction between desire and identity. This is why some people feel emotionally tired all the time. Not because life is difficult, but because they are fighting themselves internally every waking moment. One identity wants expansion. Another identity clings to limitation. One self longs to be seen. Another self fears exposure. One self dreams of freedom. Another self feels guilty for wanting more. And this invisible tension slowly consumes emotional energy like fire consuming oxygen. But what Jung discovered next was even deeper. The unconscious mind communicates symbolically, through images, through emotional associations, through rituals. through repeated internal narratives. This is why certain memories emotionally control you even years later. Not because the event still exists, but because the symbol attached to it still lives inside the unconscious. A single rejection becomes "I am not enough." A single betrayal becomes "people always leave." A single humiliation becomes "visibility is dangerous." And slowly, these symbols become unconscious laws governing reality. The mind begins organizing life around them automatically. This is why two people can experience the same event but create entirely different futures from it. One person experiences heartbreak and closes their heart forever. Another experiences heartbreak and awakens into deeper self-awareness. The external event matters less than the unconscious meaning attached to it. And this is where the 4-minute transformation truly begins. Because manifestation is not about manipulating the universe. It is about interrupting unconscious identity patterns long enough for a new psychological reality to emerge. For 4 minutes, you stop reinforcing the old self. For 4 minutes, you step outside the emotional prison. For 4 minutes, you consciously enter a different state of being. And if done correctly, the unconscious begins listening. But there is something most people never realize. The unconscious does not distinguish clearly between imagination and reality when emotion becomes intense enough. This is why trauma leaves permanent psychological imprints. The body remembers emotional experiences as if they are still happening. And this is also why visualization can become transformational when combined with genuine emotional immersion. Not fake excitement, not forced positivity. Real emotional embodiment. Jung believed symbols to possess extraordinary power over the psyche. Ancient civilizations understood this instinctively. Rituals, sacred imagery, meditation, prayer, dreams, all were methods of communicating with deeper layers of consciousness. And modern people, disconnected from their inner world, often live entirely on the surface of the mind, thinking endlessly, analyzing endlessly, overstimulated, emotionally fragmented, spiritually exhausted. But beneath the noise, the unconscious waits patiently. And the moment silence appears, it begins speaking. This is why your deepest realizations often arrive in solitude, late at night, during heartbreak, after loss, in moments of stillness when the ego temporarily weakens, because silence exposes the hidden architecture of the soul. And here is the part nobody talks about. Many people are terrified of silence because silence reveals truth. Truth about their loneliness. Truth about their emptiness. Truth about the life they secretly know they were meant to live. But truth is the beginning of transformation, not the end. The unconscious cannot heal what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. So the first step toward manifestation is not forcing belief. It is radical self-awareness. You must see the hidden patterns controlling your reality. The emotional addictions, the fears, the false identities, the inherited wounds, the invisible stories you repeat internally every single day. Because awareness dissolves unconscious control. And once a pattern becomes conscious, it begins losing power. This is why Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That sentence alone contains more transformational power than years of empty affirmations. Because true manifestation begins the moment you stop lying to yourself, the moment you admit what you truly fear, what you truly desire, what you secretly believe about yourself, and what emotional reality you have unconsciously accepted as normal. If this feels uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is often the doorway to awakening. The ego hates being exposed. It wants distraction, noise, endless stimulation. Because silence threatens the false self. And once the false self begins collapsing, the authentic self can finally emerge. Imagine walking through an abandoned house at midnight. Every locked room represents a forgotten part of yourself, a rejected emotion, a buried memory, a hidden fear. Most people spend their entire lives running from those rooms. But Jung walked directly into them, and what he discovered was extraordinary. Behind the shadow, behind the fear, behind the pain, there was enormous psychic energy waiting to be reclaimed. Your suppressed power, your creativity, your intuition, your magnetism, your authenticity, your life force. The energy required to manifest a new reality has always existed within you. It was simply trapped beneath unconscious conflict. And in the next part, everything begins changing. Because once awareness enters the unconscious, identity itself starts transforming. The old self weakens. The emotional patterns begin dissolving. And for the first time, you stop chasing your desire from desperation. You begin attracting it from inner alignment. There comes a moment in every true transformation where the old identity begins to collapse. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, like an ancient building cracking beneath the weight of truth it can no longer contain. And this moment feels terrifying, because the personality you spent years protecting suddenly starts feeling unfamiliar. The mask becomes heavy. The performances become exhausting. The endless pretending begins suffocating the soul. And for the first time in your life, you realize something almost unbearable. You were never truly chasing your desire. You were chasing the feeling you believed the desire would finally give you. Love, safety, worthiness, recognition, freedom, peace. The tragedy is that most people search for these feelings externally while remaining internally disconnected from themselves. And this is why even fulfilled desires often fail to satisfy the unconscious emptiness beneath them. People manifest money and still feel poor, manifest relationships and still feel unloved, manifest success and still feel invisible. Because external reality cannot permanently heal an identity built upon unconscious lack. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He understood that the human psyche does not transform through acquisition alone. It transforms through integration, through becoming whole. And this is where manifestation enters an entirely different dimension. Because the goal is no longer merely to get what you want. The goal becomes psychological embodiment, to become internally identical to the reality you seek. Stay with me because this is important. Most people unknowingly live in emotional anticipation, always waiting. Waiting for life to begin. Waiting for permission. Waiting for circumstances to finally validate their worth. And while waiting, they unconsciously reinforce the very identity keeping them trapped. The identity of absence. The identity of incompleteness. The identity that says, I will finally feel whole when... But the unconscious mind hears something deeper hidden beneath those words. It hears, I am not whole now. And reality continues reflecting that internal separation. This is why true manifestation begins, the moment emotional dependence on the outcome dissolves. Not because desire disappears, but because identity changes. You stop relating to your desire like a starving person begging for survival, and begin relating to it like something already psychologically compatible with who you are becoming. This shift is subtle, but enormous. It changes your posture, your energy, your decisions, your perception, your emotional field, and suddenly reality responds differently to you because you are not longer emotionally broadcasting desperation. You are broadcasting coherence. Carl Jung believed every human being carries within them a deeper blueprint of wholeness, a hidden psychological center he called the self, not the ego, not the persona, not the wounded identity constructed through pain and conditioning, but the deeper totality of your being, the authentic self hidden beneath social masks and unconscious fragmentation. And manifestation becomes powerful the moment the ego stops fighting this deeper self. Because most suffering comes from psychological misalignment, living against your nature, suppressing your truth, performing identities that disconnect you from your soul. This is why some people feel exhausted even when doing everything correctly. Their external life may appear successful, but internally the psyche is starving. The authentic self has been abandoned. And the unconscious responds to this abandonment through anxiety, emptiness, emotional numbness, self-sabotage, and silent despair. But what happens next changes everything. Because once you begin reconnecting with the authentic self, reality itself starts feeling different. Not instantly, not magically, but perceptually. And perception shapes experience more than most people realize. You begin noticing opportunities you once ignored. You stop chasing unavailable people. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that dishonor your spirit. You stop begging for validation from emotionally unconscious individuals. And perhaps most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself. This is where manifestation shifts from fantasy into psychological inevitability, because the unconscious no longer sees your desires as threats. It begins accepting them as extensions of your evolving identity. And this is why 4 minutes can become transformational. Because during those 4 minutes, you temporarily step beyond the conditioned self. You interrupt the old emotional program. You create a psychological opening, a doorway, a threshold between the old identity and the emerging self. Here is how it truly works beneath the surface. For 4 minutes, you enter complete stillness. No distraction, no noise, no external stimulation, only awareness, only breath, only presence. And at first, the mind resists violently. Thoughts rush in, doubts appear, memories surface, anxiety begins speaking. The ego panics because silence threatens its control. But if you remain present, something extraordinary begins happening. The emotional turbulence slowly weakens, the surface mind quiets, and beneath it, you begin sensing a deeper level of consciousness, a calmer intelligence, an observing awareness untouched by fear. This is the state Jung considered essential for transformation. Because only in conscious awareness can unconscious patterns finally be seen clearly. And once you reach this state, you do something most people never do. You stop imagining your desire externally and begin embodying it internally, not forcing emotion, not pretending, embodiment. You ask yourself, who am I becoming if this desire already belongs to me? How does this version of me breathe, move, think, feel? What emotional reality surrounds this identity? And suddenly the focus changes completely. You are no longer chasing an outcome. You are constructing a self. This is the hidden secret behind every profound transformation in human history. People do not change their lives by obsessing over goals. They change their lives by transforming identity. Because identity unconsciously shapes behavior. Behavior shapes decisions. Decisions shape reality. And reality eventually mirrors the inner self repeatedly reinforced over time. But the truth goes further than that. The unconscious mind responds most powerfully to emotional repetition combined with symbolic meaning. This is why rituals feel transformative. Why prayer affects consciousness. Why certain memories emotionally haunt people for decades. Emotion carves psychological pathways into the unconscious, and repetition strengthens them. So when you spend 4 minutes daily entering a state of deep emotional alignment with your emerging self, you slowly weaken the old identity and strengthen the new one. Not intellectually, neurologically, emotionally, energetically. Your nervous system begins adapting to a new reality internally before it fully appears externally. And this is where manifestation starts becoming visible. Not always through miracles, but through synchronicities, unexpected conversations, new opportunities, sudden clarity, intuitive impulses, chance encounters that feel strangely destined. Jung called these meaningful coincidences synchronicity. Moments when inner transformation and external reality begin mysteriously aligning. Most people dismiss these moments, but psychologically awakened individuals recognize them immediately. Because once the unconscious and conscious mind move in harmony, reality begins reflecting that coherence in extraordinary ways. Have you ever noticed how life changes rapidly after a deep internal shift? Not because the world suddenly transformed overnight, but because you did. And once identity changes, the world interacts with you differently. This is why inner work is never separate from external reality. They are mirrors of one another. And here is the part nobody talks about. As your authentic self emerges, certain people will become uncomfortable around you. Not because you change negatively, but because your transformation exposes their stagnation. Your authenticity threatens false identities. Your self-respect disrupts unhealthy dynamics. Your emotional awareness reveals unconscious behavior in others. And many people would rather lose you than confront themselves. This is why awakening can feel lonely. The old connections weaken. The old masks dissolve. The old emotional addictions fade. And for a while, you stand between identities. No longer who you were. Not fully who you are becoming. A psychological threshold, a sacred in-between space Jung believed was necessary for rebirth. If you are currently in that space, comment the number 11 below, because this stage often feels confusing. But it is also sacred. You are not falling apart. You are separating from an identity that no longer matches your soul. And in the next part, we go even deeper, because there is a hidden truth about reality itself that Jung understood with terrifying clarity. A truth about perception, consciousness, and the invisible forces shaping human existence. And once you understand it, you will never see your mind the same way again. There is a terrifying possibility most people spend their entire lives avoiding. A possibility Carl Jung understood so deeply that it transformed the way he viewed reality itself. What if the life you are experiencing is not merely happening to you, but emerging through you? What if reality is not only external circumstance, but psychological projection? Not in the simplistic way modern spirituality often describes it, but in a far deeper, almost unsettling sense. Because Jung believed the unconscious mind does not simply influence isolated thoughts. It shapes perception itself. And perception is the lens through which reality becomes emotionally real. Two people can stand inside the same room and experience entirely different worlds. One sees rejection. Another sees opportunity. One sees hostility. Another sees possibility. One sees proof of unworthiness. Another sees a challenge meant to awaken growth. The external environment may remain identical, but the inner world interprets it differently. And interpretation becomes experience. This is why unconscious wounds silently recreate themselves across years, relationships, careers, and life circumstances. Not because fate is cruel, but because the psyche continuously seeks confirmation of its deepest beliefs. If you unconsciously believe abandonment defines you, the mind begins organizing perception around abandonment. You become hyper-aware of distance, sensitive to rejection, drawn toward emotionally unavailable people, terrified of intimacy. And slowly, without realizing it, you recreate the very pain you fear most. This is how unconscious identity shapes destiny. And here is where everything becomes even deeper. Jung believed the human psyche is connected to something far greater than individual experience. The collective unconscious, an invisible reservoir of universal human symbols, archetypes, emotional patterns, and ancient psychological forces shared across humanity itself. This means your desires are not always random. Your fears are not always personal. Your emotional struggles are often connected to ancient human patterns older than your individual life. The abandoned child, the wounded lover, the seeker, the exile, the warrior, the creator, the shadow. These archetypes live inside every human being. And when unconscious, they shape behavior automatically. This is why certain moments in life feel strangely symbolic, like dreams unfolding through reality itself. Like invisible forces pulling you toward transformation even while the ego resists. Have you ever experienced a period where life began stripping everything away from you? Relationships ending, identities collapsing, comfort disappearing, old goals losing meaning. And despite the pain, something inside you quietly sensed it was necessary. Jung understood these moments as psychological death and rebirth, the destruction of the false self. Because the psyche will eventually force transformation when avoidance becomes unbearable. And this is where manifestation takes on a completely different meaning. It is no longer about controlling reality. It is about participating consciously in your own evolution. The unconscious constantly pushes you toward wholeness, toward authenticity, toward integration. But the ego resists because authenticity requires vulnerability. And vulnerability terrifies the conditioned mind. Most people would rather maintain a familiar identity than risk discovering who they truly are. Because authenticity changes everything. It changes relationships, priorities, values, desires, entire life directions. And many people sense this unconsciously, which is why they remain trapped in distraction. Constant stimulation, constant noise, constant movement. Because stillness awakens awareness, and awareness threatens illusion. Stay with me because this is important. There is a hidden reason silence feels uncomfortable to so many people. Silence removes escape. Without distraction, the unconscious begins rising to the surface. Unprocessed grief, buried fear, loneliness, regret, suppressed desires. The truth about the life you secretly know you are meant to live. And this is why modern life keeps people overstimulated, because a distracted mind rarely transforms. Transformation requires confrontation. Not with the world, but with yourself. Jung spent years exploring dreams, symbols, myths, and the unconscious because he realized human beings are far more mysterious than they appear. We are not merely logical creatures making rational choices. We are symbolic beings shaped by invisible emotional forces beneath conscious awareness. And once you truly understand this, manifestation becomes less about forcing outcomes and more about mastering inner reality, because external reality often mirrors unconscious expectation. Not perfectly, not mechanically, but psychologically. People who unconsciously expect betrayal often tolerate betrayal. People who unconsciously expect scarcity often overlook abundance. People who unconsciously believe they are invisible often silence themselves before the world ever does. And meanwhile, those who internally accept their worth move through life differently. Not arrogantly, not perfectly, but coherently. They trust themselves. They take action without constant self-betrayal. They stop negotiating against their own desires. And reality responds to that internal certainty. This is why the 4-minute practice becomes so powerful. Because for 4 minutes, you interrupt the unconscious conditioning shaping your identity. You consciously choose stillness over noise, awareness over avoidance, embodiment over desperation, and slowly your inner world reorganizes itself. But what most people never realize is that manifestation often begins invisibly. Before external results appear, internal perception changes first. You notice synchronicities. You feel less emotionally reactive. Old fears lose intensity. Certain people drift away naturally. New opportunities begin appearing. Your intuition sharpens. And suddenly you feel something unfamiliar, inner space. A quietness where anxiety once lived. A groundedness where desperation once ruled. This is not fantasy. This is psychological integration. Integration creates power, not loud power, not performative power, silent power. The kind of power that changes an entire room without speaking. The kind of power rooted in self-possession. Because people can unconsciously feel when someone has stopped abandoning themselves. And here is the hidden truth few people are ready to hear. The universe often removes what no longer matches your emerging identity. This is why awakening sometimes feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Old friendships dissolve. Old ambitions collapse. Old emotional attachments weaken. And the ego interprets this as failure, but psychologically, something deeper is happening. The false structure is breaking apart so the authentic self can finally emerge. Think about a snake shedding old skin. From the outside, it appears vulnerable during the process. Exposed, uncomfortable, unprotected. But the shedding is necessary for growth. And human transformation works the same way. You cannot manifest a new reality while clinging to an old identity. Eventually something must be released. A belief, a fear, to mask. A version of yourself built entirely around survival. And this is where many people turn back. Because the unknown feels terrifying. But Jung believed the path toward wholeness always requires walking through uncertainty. The cave you fear entering holds the treasure you seek. That sentence alone explains the entire human journey. The fear is the doorway. The shadow guards the transformation. And the life you desire often exists beyond the psychological barriers you are afraid to confront. If this resonates with your soul, if you feel like life has been forcing you to evolve lately, comment the number 520 below, not as a trend, but as recognition. A sign that you understand transformation is not punishment, it is initiation. And what happens next changes everything. Because in the final part, we enter the deepest layer of manifestation itself. The moment where identity, emotion, consciousness, and reality merge together. The final awakening Jung believed every human being unconsciously longs for, the return to the authentic self. There comes a moment in every true awakening where the endless searching finally begins to die. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, not because pain disappears forever, but because something far more important happens. You stop searching for yourself in places that were never capable of holding your soul. And in that moment, something ancient inside you exhales. For years, perhaps your entire life, you believed fulfillment existed somewhere outside you, in another relationship, another achievement, another version of yourself, another future. You kept running toward distant horizons while silently abandoning the person walking inside your own mind. And the deeper tragedy was this. The world rewarded your mask while your soul slowly disappeared into silence. But Carl Jung understood something few people are willing to confront. The greatest human suffering is not failure. It is self-alienation. The slow separation from your authentic nature. The gradual loss of inner truth beneath performance, conditioning, fear, and emotional survival. This is why so many people feel empty even while appearing successful. Because the soul cannot be nourished by external validation alone. The unconscious longs for wholeness, for authenticity, for integration, for reunion with the self buried beneath years of pretending. And manifestation, at its deepest level, is not the art of acquiring. It is the art of remembering who you truly are. Stay with me because this is important. Everything changes the moment you stop asking, how do I force reality to give me what I want? And begin asking, who am I becoming through this desire? That single shift transforms manifestation from obsession into awakening. Because desires are often symbolic, the soul rarely wants the object itself as much as the state of being connected to it. The love you crave may actually be the longing to finally feel emotionally safe. The success you chase may secretly represent freedom from invisibility. The wealth you desire may symbolize liberation from fear. And once you understand the emotional truth beneath the desire, the unconscious begins opening. This is why the 4-minute practice matters so deeply. Not because 4 minutes are magically powerful, but because most people never truly meet themselves for even 4 honest minutes. Their minds are constantly distracted, constantly escaping, constantly overstimulated. And beneath all that noise, the authentic self waits in silence, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be heard, waiting to be chosen. Imagine standing before a mirror in complete darkness. At first, you see nothing, only shadow, only uncertainty, only silence. But slowly, as your eyes adjust, shapes begin emerging, contours, depth, presence, and eventually, you realize the darkness was never empty. It was simply unfamiliar. This is exactly what happens when you begin facing your unconscious mind consciously. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Fear rises. Old memories surface. Emotional pain awakens. The ego desperately searches for distraction. But if you remain present, truly present, something extraordinary begins unfolding. You begin recovering parts of yourself you thought were lost forever. Your intuition returns. Your emotional clarity deepens. Your self-respect strengthens. Your energy changes. And slowly, the need to chase external validation weakens, because you no longer feel emotionally abandoned inside yourself. This is the hidden secret behind magnetism. Not beauty, not status, not perfection. Inner wholeness. People are unconsciously drawn toward individuals who feel psychologically integrated, because integrated people radiate presence, calmness, authenticity, emotional coherence. They are no longer fragmented against themselves, and reality responds differently to such people. Not because they control the universe, but because they finally stopped resisting their own nature. Carl Jung believed every human being carries within them an unconscious blueprint pushing them toward individuation, toward becoming fully themselves, not socially approved, not artificially perfected, themselves. And the painful experiences of life often exist to shatter false identities, preventing this process. Heartbreak, loss, rejection, loneliness, failure. Experiences feel cruel when viewed through the ego. But psychologically, many of them are invitations, thresholds, sacred disruptions meant to awaken deeper consciousness. This is why some people emerge from suffering wiser, while others become bitter. One person closes their heart, another opens their soul. One person becomes trapped by pain, another transforms through it. The difference is awareness. The willingness to confront the unconscious instead of running from it. And here is the part nobody talks about. Your greatest manifestations often arrive after emotional surrender, after the ego exhausts itself, after the endless forcing collapses, after you finally stop trying to control every outcome. Because surrender is not weakness, it is psychological trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in life. Trust that your worth is not dependent on immediate external confirmation. This is why desperate energy repels. Desperation says, I am incomplete without this. But wholeness says, I can. To desire deeply without abandoning myself. That energy changes everything. It changes how you speak, how you move, what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you finally release. The unconscious begins reorganizing around this new emotional truth. And suddenly the life you once chased begins moving toward you naturally. Not always instantly, not always dramatically, but inevitably. Because reality reflects identity over time. And once your identity changes at the unconscious level, your external world slowly follows. This is why some manifestations appear almost suddenly after years of delay. The external opportunity may have existed all along, but psychologically you were not yet aligned with receiving it. The unconscious still carried fear, scarcity, unworthiness, emotional contradiction. And once those barriers dissolve, life flows differently. Doors open. Synchronicities increase. Clarity sharpens. The right people appear. Not because you manipulated the universe, but because you finally stopped fighting yourself. And perhaps this is the deepest truth Jung ever discovered. The human soul does not want perfection. It wants wholeness, not endless positivity, not constant happiness, wholeness, the integration of light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, desire and peace, humanity and divinity. And the moment you stop rejecting parts of yourself, your relationship with reality transforms completely. You stop viewing yourself as broken. You stop treating life like punishment. You stop chasing worthiness through endless performance. And for the first time, maybe in your entire life, you feel internally free. Not because everything outside changed overnight, but because you did. The prison was never only external. It was psychological, emotional, unconscious. And once awareness enters the unconscious, the walls begin collapsing. So tonight, before sleep finds you, sit in silence for 4 minutes. No distractions. No performance, no pretending, just awareness. Feel your breath, feel your body. Feel the hidden emotions beneath the noise. And then ask yourself one question honestly. What would my life feel like if I truly stopped abandoning myself? Not tomorrow, not someday, now. Because perhaps the desire you have been chasing all along was never trying to lead you toward another life. Perhaps it was trying to lead you back to yourself. And once that reunion begins, everything changes.